The restless herd. 4 years, the mountain goats at the Denver Zoo had lived in what was designed to be a comfortable habitat. Their enclosure was spacious, filled with artificial rock formations meant to resemble their natural mountain home. Visitors marveled at their agility as they leaped from boulder to boulder, and zookeepers ensured they had everything they needed, except perhaps the one thing they truly craved: real mountains. Something had changed recently. The goats, once content, had grown restless. It started with subtle signs: long, longing gazes toward the distant Rockies, an unusual hesitation before eating, and increased pacing near the edges of their enclosure. Some goats even began scraping their hooves against the fake rocks, as if testing their authenticity. Others refused to engage in their usual climbing games, instead staring up at the sky, as if yearning for something beyond their reach. Zookeepers noticed a shift in their behavior, but it wasn't until one morning when Greg, the head caretaker, found a group of them staring intently at the horizon that he realized something deeper was happening. "I think they know," he muttered to a colleague. "They know these aren't real mountains." His colleague laughed, but Greg wasn't joking. Over the years, he had developed a deep respect for the intelligence of these animals. He had seen them solve puzzles, forge strong bonds, and even recognize specific zookeepers. If they had figured out their habitat wasn't real, what would they do next? The plan takes shape. Unbeknownst to the zoo staff, the goats had already devised a plan. Led by an old and wise buck named Granite, the herd had been carefully observing their surroundings. They had watched the zookeepers latch the gates, memorized the feeding schedules, and even understood when the night shift was at its lightest. Their intelligence and keen instincts made them natural strategists. Granite had lived long enough to know that something wasn't right. The cool breeze that whispered through the trees in their enclosure carried scents of asphalt, car fumes, and food stands, nothing like the crisp, high-altitude air of their ancestral home. He had spent weeks silently communicating with the others, nudging them toward an idea that seemed crazy but necessary. "We were born for cliffs, not cages," he seemed to say with his determined stare. "It's time to go home." Each night, the goats practiced their escape techniques. They tested the strength of the enclosure's fencing, found weak points in the structure, and even timed how long it took for zookeepers to respond to unusual activity. Young and energetic Pebble, the most daring of the group, had already discovered a gate that sometimes wasn't latched properly. As the days passed, excitement grew among the herd. They no longer felt like captives. They felt like pioneers, planning an expedition back to the land where they truly belonged. The Great Escape. On a quiet Wednesday night, when the zoo was at its most peaceful, the goats made their move. The youngest and most nimble among them, Pebble, managed to nudge open the improperly latched gate. The sound of metal clicking open sent a ripple of energy through the herd. One by one, they slipped into the shadows, their hooves barely making a sound as they crept toward the perimeter. Their biggest challenge lay ahead: the final fence. It was tall and topped with smooth metal, designed to keep animals in. But mountain goats weren't just any animals. Their hooves, built for gripping impossible surfaces, found the tiniest footholds, and with synchronized precision, they climbed over the barrier and vanished into the night. By morning, zoo officials were baffled. "Where did they go?" Greg asked, staring at the empty enclosure. Security footage showed only the flick of a tail and the glint of horns disappearing toward the city's edge. Panic set in. Local authorities were alerted, and news reports flooded social media. The city of Denver was on high alert. Citizens were instructed to report any sightings of goats wandering the streets. Yet, despite all efforts, the escapees seemed to have vanished into thin air. A new beginning. The goats' journey to the mountains wasn't easy. They had to navigate city streets, dodge traffic, and avoid curious humans. At one point, they took refuge in a community garden, feasting on fresh greens before setting off again. Pebble nearly got caught when he wandered too close to a food truck, lured by the smell of sizzling vegetables. But Granite kept them moving, always guiding them toward the distant peaks. News stations quickly picked up the story, and social media exploded with hashtags like #GoatEscape and #FreeTheMountains. Some people cheered them on while others worried about their safety. One local hiker even claimed to have seen them scaling the foothills at sunrise. Finally, after days of travel, the goats reached the base of the Rockies. The moment Granite stepped onto Rail Mountain Rock, he let out a triumphant bleat. They had made it. Back at the zoo, Greg stood by the empty habitat. "Maybe they were never meant to be here," he admitted with a smile. "I just hope they send a postcard from the top." Days later, a blurry photo surfaced online. A hiker had captured an image of a small herd of mountain goats silhouetted against a breathtaking alpine backdrop. There, standing proudly at the peak, was Granite, his golden horns gleaming in the sunlight. They were finally home,